Hello, I'm Diane the Rail, and 5 minutes ago my parents told me I don't have a home anymore. Not because I lost it, because they sold it while I was serving overseas. If you think that sounds impossible, trust me, I thought so too. But nothing prepares you for the moment your own family erases you on paper and calls it love. And then, the gravel crunched beneath my boots like it had done 1,000 times before. But this time, it sounded foreign. The sound didn't belong to me anymore. The sky above Spokane Valley had started to bruise into that soft purplish hue I used to love when I came home from a run. Now it just felt like dusk was closing in on something I hadn't even touched yet. My duffel bag weighed on my shoulder, not because of what was inside, but because of what I was about to face. I hadn't called ahead. I didn't think I had to. This house, this villa, had been mine since my second deployment. I bought it when I was 27, with a VA loan, pride in my spine, and a vision of stability I never had growing up. And now the front yard had a sold sign staked into the flower bed my grandmother used to kneel beside every spring. Lazaro was standing on the porch. I still can't call him Dad in these moments. Not when he doesn't look like someone I know. His arms were crossed. His mouth barely moved. "You're homeless now," he said like it was a weather report. I blinked. What? Valora, standing behind him with her stemless wine glass, let out a chuckle. "Don't act surprised, sweetheart. You were gone. And it was abandoned." Her voice always had that soft, southern-inflected sweetness, like molasses poured over something poisonous. I hadn't even stepped onto the first stair. My feet rooted to the gravel. My palms felt too tight around the duffel handle. My mind didn't catch up for at least 20 seconds. "Abandoned," I repeated, my throat dry. "You didn't live here," she said. 18 months, Diantha. You didn't even write." "That's not true," I whispered. "I paid the taxes. I called." "Voice messages don't count as presents," Valora interrupted. "We assumed you moved on. Like you always do." My name had been taken off things before, group chats, photo albums, Christmas cards, but never a deed. Never the one place that had my initials carved into the kitchen windowsill. Looking back now, I should have seen it coming. I dropped my duffel bag softly. Not like surrender. More like readiness. This was my house. Lazaro shrugged. "Not anymore. Papers are signed. You weren't here. You had no right." "We had power of attorney," Valora chimed in. "That was for emergency maintenance, not sale." "Legal's legal," she smirked. There was no invitation into the house. Just silence. The kind that scratches the back of your neck. I stepped closer, 1 foot on the porch stair. The wood groaned, probably out of habit, not welcome. "What about my things?" I asked. "My books, my—" Valora sipped. "Donated. You didn't say you were coming home." And that's when it hit me. It wasn't just the house. It was the memory of me they'd sold off. Boxed up. Hauled away like leftovers no one claimed after a funeral. You could have called. You could have stayed. My breath slowed. Not calm, measured. There's a difference. You really sold my house while I was overseas? It was for the good of the family, Lazaro said. Joran needed help. That name sent a pulse behind my eyes. My cousin. The one who's lost 3 jobs and 2 apartments in 5 years. The one Valora treats like a lost prince. "So you gave him my house." Valora corrected me. "We gave him a chance." "You're strong." "He's not." That was it. The great family equation. Sacrifice the steady one to save the fragile. I wasn't fragile enough to deserve keeping what I'd built. "Don't look so offended," she said. "You've always been the wanderer." And that's when I knew this wasn't an accident. This wasn't miscommunication. This was a decision. A clean cut. A forced exit. and I was supposed to walk away quietly. But something in me refused to move. "You did all this behind my back," I said, voice low. Valora's smile thinned. "Don't be dramatic. We did what was necessary. You lied. We protected the family. You don't understand because you're never here." I took another step. The porch light flickered above us, like even the electricity didn't know where to settle. I stared at the door. The one I painted with Grandma when I was 20. We chose deep navy because she said it made the house look serious. "You used me," I said. "You used my absence as a loophole." Lazaro's voice cracked. "It's just a house." "No," I said. "It was my return." Valora looked away first. Lazaro held his gaze, but only for a moment longer. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. But I did smile, small, deliberate, like someone who already knows the answer to a question that hasn't been asked yet. I stepped forward again. This time, Valora moved to block the door. She didn't say a word, but her hand hovered on the knob like it might burn her to let me touch it. So I stopped. Not because I was afraid. Because I realized I didn't need to go in to take back what was mine. I only needed to show them I wasn't leaving. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. But I knew this was only the beginning. I moved around the side of the house with the weight of memory pressing on my ribs like I'd wrapped myself in a lead blanket. The breeze had cooled, but sweat had started gathering behind my neck, not from heat, but the kind that comes from holding yourself too still for too long. The side gate groaned like it remembered me, but didn't approve. I slipped through and followed the stone path around back. The lights inside the house glowed warm and artificial, like something staged for a real estate brochure. I didn't knock. I didn't need permission. The laundry room door creaked as I opened it, exactly the way I remembered. I had oiled those hinges years ago. Funny how betrayal doesn't squeak, but memory does. The scent hit first. Lavender and sage. My grandmother always used lemon polish, never lavender. This wasn't cleaning. This was erasure. Looking back now, I should have known I was already being written out. The hallway used to be lined with photo frames. Not anymore. What used to be our family through the years had been replaced with modern abstract art, cold, shapeless, intentional. I didn't see a single face I recognized, not even mine. That's where it all started. I moved slowly, each step cautious, like I was trespassing in a house I once owned. A house that had my name on the mortgage, on the tax documents, on every VA loan file I'd filed by hand. But here, in this hallway, I didn't exist. I was a ghost with a pulse. When I reached the door to my room, what used to be my room, I paused. The door was open. I could hear soft instrumental music, the kind they play at spas or in boutique yoga studios. I stepped in. It wasn't mine anymore. The hardwood was polished, exposed. The carpet was gone. On the far end, where my bookshelf used to stand, sat a yoga mat rolled neatly next to a stack of bolsters and a glowing Himalayan salt lamp. The walls had been repainted a muted gray. A reed diffuser sat on the windowsill. I looked for any trace of myself. A dent in the wall, a scratch on the closet door. Nothing. Valora's voice drifted from behind me. "I figured you wouldn't be needing it. It's better use now." I didn't turn around. I didn't give her that. She didn't clear the room. She cleared me out of it. The way someone vacuums a corner, quietly, efficiently, like removing a mess. I stepped out, careful not to brush against anything, as if it might contaminate me, or worse, remind me of what I no longer had the right to claim. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. The hallway opened into the living room. The lighting was soft and deliberate, table lamps, not overhead bulbs. Scented candles flickered. The shelf that used to hold my grandmother's shrine still stood against the far wall, but its contents had been rearranged. The brass candlesticks were gone. So were the prayer beads. The heirloom vase remained, but it was filled with artificial eucalyptus instead of wildflowers from the backyard. I approached slowly. Her picture was still there, my grandmother's. But the frame with both of us, the one we took on the porch after I got my promotion, was missing. In its place was a new photo. Valora, Lazaro, Joran, smiling, standing in front of this very house like it was theirs, like it had always been. My throat clenched, not because I was sad, but because they had already moved on, and they didn't wait for me to leave first. I heard Valora's steps behind me before she spoke. You don't need to linger here, sweetheart. There's nothing left for you in this place. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice to hold the weight of everything I was swallowing. Instead, I reached out and ran my finger along the space where our photo used to be. The dust line hadn't even been wiped clean, just replaced. My breath caught, not from pain, but from clarity. This wasn't grief. This was displacement. A quiet, calculated eviction of identity. Looking back now, I see it clearly. They didn't just get rid of my belongings. They rehearsed my absence until it felt like memory. And the more I stared at that empty space on the shelf, the more I realized I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been replaced before I even knew I was gone. I stepped away from that empty shelf with a tightness in my chest I hadn't felt since basic training, when a drill instructor stood inches from my face and told me I'd never be enough. The sting was the same now, just wrapped in the softer tone of my own mother's choices. I didn't stay upstairs. My feet moved on their own, carrying me through the hallway toward the back door like some part of me already knew there was more waiting to be uncovered. The sun hadn't risen yet. The house was still. That quiet, the kind that hums low under the floorboards, felt heavier than anger. I slipped out to the backyard, following the stone path toward the old storage room my grandmother once used. The door stuck for a moment before giving way with a tired sigh. It always did that when the seasons changed. Inside, the air smelled of cedar trunks and forgotten perfume. Dust floated in thin rays of light cutting through the small window. I pulled the chain on the hanging bulb. The light flickered to life, and for a moment, it felt like stepping into her arms, warm, familiar, safe. But warmth fades fast when truth waits behind it. I knelt beside a stack of boxes, letting my fingers trace the worn cardboard. The one marked old linen sat slightly crooked. I pulled it closer, the tape flaking under my nails. When I opened the lid, I expected quilts. Maybe the embroidered pillowcase she made for my 12th birthday. Instead, something thin slipped forward, a small envelope tucked between two folded blankets. My name on the front, written in her slow, elegant script. My heart jolted. I eased it open, afraid it might crumble if I breathed too hard. Inside was one sheet, folded carefully, edges softened by time. Diantha, if this ever finds you, it means I wasn't brave enough to stop her. I sat back on my heels, feeling the words settle over me like cold ash. My grandmother never wrote anything without purpose, and she never used the word stop unless she meant danger. Looking back now, I should have known this wasn't just about property. The next line trembled with truth. Valora never wanted me to leave the house to you. She said you wouldn't use it, but you were always the one who saw it as home. Not a burden, not a trophy. My hands tightened around the page. I could almost hear her voice. The softness she used when she brushed my hair. The firmness when she warned me that people often fear the ones they can't control. The letter ended with a line that pierced deeper than anything my parents said on that porch. Don't let them tell your story for you. They already tried to erase mine. I didn't cry, because I missed her. I cried because she saw this coming, and still, no one warned me. That's where it all started. I folded the letter gently, placing it inside my jacket. The weight of it felt like armor, thin but real. I walked out into the morning air, letting the cold steady me. I needed more answers, answers someone still living could give. Agnes Merrill's house was only 4 doors down. She always woke early. By the time I knocked, she was already at her kitchen table with her crossword puzzle and tea. She looked up startled. "Diantha? Honey, I heard you were out of the country." "Agnes," I said softly, holding the letter. "Why didn't you tell me?" She pressed her lips together, eyes reddening. "I tried, sweetheart. I called you the day the house went up for sale. Told you something wasn't right. I left a message." "I never got it." Agnes shook her head. "Valora told me you weren't returning calls, that you'd cut ties. She said you didn't want the responsibility." That phrase hit like a slap. Responsibility. The word Valora used whenever she wanted something done her way. When I stepped outside, I pulled out my phone. Voicemail, empty. Backup server, cleared. Except one message remained from 3 months ago. "Don't come home unless you've decided what side you're on." Her voice. Her rules. Her script. I wasn't silenced. I was preemptively muted. By the time I returned to the house, my heartbeat had shifted. Less hurt. More clarity. And clarity has edges. I walked past the living room just as Valora spoke into the phone, voice dripping with practiced concern. "She travels too much. She never settled down. I don't think she's mentally equipped to manage property long term." She said it like a diagnosis, like she was doing someone a favor by taking control. I froze in the hallway, letting every word carve its place inside me. So this was the narrative now. Unstable, irresponsible, unfit, but somehow stable enough for them to take every piece of what I'd earned. Looking back now, I understand the precision of it. The way a story can be rewritten without ever touching ink. The way a family can decide who you are without letting you speak. If I was so unfit to own that house, why had they worked so hard to steal it? I didn't leave to start a fight. But now I knew I was already in one. I stopped asking why they did it. I started asking how to prove it. 2 days later, I found myself standing in a government building that felt more like a waiting room for bad news than a place of answers. The walls were painted beige, the kind of beige that made everything feel like it had happened decades ago. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like they were trying to whisper secrets. The man behind the partition didn't look up right away. He wore a badge, but not a smile. His fingers tapped at the keyboard with mechanical efficiency. I slid my ID across the counter. He asked my name, date of birth, case type. Then he disappeared for a few minutes that stretched out like an accusation. When he returned, he had a file folder in hand. It was thin, too thin, like my existence, and it had been erased down to a footnote. "Here's the signed waiver of inheritance," he said. "States you relinquished all rights to the property while stationed in Tokyo." My mouth didn't move. Not yet. I reached for the paper slowly, like it might bite. The signature was there, my name, my handwriting almost. But it wasn't mine. "I've never been to Tokyo," I said quietly. The man blinked once, maybe twice. "That's what the power of attorney file says. Your mother submitted it last April. The paperwork looks clean." Clean. Like the way Valora smiled when she lied. Like the way you wipe a surface after spilling something ugly. Looking back now, I should have known they had rehearsed this version of the story, right down to the location. Tokyo. Just far enough to sound legitimate, just foreign enough to make me unreachable. I didn't argue. Not there. Not yet. But my fingers curled around that file like it held something fragile, like my last claim to the truth was printed in 12-point font. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. By the time I pulled into the driveway for Joran's backyard birthday party, the sun had started to dip behind the trees, casting a long shadow across the lawn. Laughter spilled out from the backyard, the kind that sounds louder when you're standing alone. No one noticed me at first. Or maybe they did, and just didn't care. Either way, I stood near the fence for a moment longer than necessary, letting the sound of clinking glasses and plastic chairs dragging over concrete remind me of how easily a family can celebrate your absence. A chalkboard sign leaned against the tree near the patio. New beginnings. I almost laughed. I walked past the buffet table, store-bought cupcakes, potato salad, barbecue ribs, like I belonged. A little girl tugged at her friend's sleeve and whispered, "She's the one who ran away, right?" The other nodded, barely looking at me. Grandma said she didn't want the house anymore. I paused near the cooler. The ice inside had mostly melted. Bottled water floated among a sea of cola and lemonade. I bent down, grabbed a water, and took a long sip, not because I was thirsty, but because I needed something to do with my hands. Looking back now, that moment burned the deepest. Not the lies. The casual way they've been passed down like bedtime stories. Lies told often enough don't just stick. They plant roots in the mouths of children. Valora stood under the string lights, surrounded by neighbors. Her laughter bubbled in that easy, practiced way, graceful, warm, rehearsed. Lazaro stood a few feet behind her, his plate untouched. His silence was its own form of agreement. Joran raised a glass. "To the family," he said, "for giving me this chance. For believing I could make this house a home again." I wanted to ask what again meant, as if it had stopped being a home the moment I walked out with my deployment orders. As if his arrival somehow restored value I had somehow drained. Valora turned to a woman beside her, voice soft but clear. "We just wanted to keep it in the family," she said. "Our daughter, well, she's on a different path now. Not gone. Not dead. Just reassigned. Like a piece of furniture you put in storage because it doesn't match the new decor." I took one step back. They didn't mourn me. They didn't forget me. They rehearsed my disappearance. I turned and left without saying a word. Not because I didn't have one, but because I knew I'd only get one chance to say it where it mattered. I didn't walk straight to my motel after the party. Some part of me needed to circle the block twice, breathing through the kind of hurt that presses on your ribs until they creak. The night air felt colder than it should have, or maybe that was just the shift inside me. The moment a wound stops bleeding and starts hardening. I told myself I wasn't going back to the house. Not that night. But my feet didn't listen. They turned down the familiar street, moved up the driveway, and carried me straight through the back door like muscle memory still believed I belonged there. Maybe it was habit. Maybe defiance. Maybe both. The kitchen lights were on. Valora was arranging hydrangeas in the vase my grandmother left me in her will. The irony wasn't lost on me. She always touched the things she claimed weren't mine. She didn't look up when I stepped inside. "I thought you'd be at the party longer," she said, voice smooth as polished stone. "I wasn't invited," I replied. She hummed like that was a trivial detail, like forgetting your own daughter from a guest list wasn't a choice. I took a slow breath. "Did you sign over the house before or after Grandma died?" She adjusted a pedal. "Before," she said casually. She was slipping. "You weren't here." The way she said it, clean, rehearsed, made something inside me sharpen. "Slipping," I repeated. She was perfectly capable when she wrote the letter I found. Her hand paused midair. Just a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Looking back now, I should have recognized that moment for what it was. The first crack in her armor. "I don't know what letter you're talking about," she said softly. Too softly. Your grandmother wrote lots of things near the end. She wasn't clear. She was clear in this, I said, placing the folded page on the table. Valora's eyes flicked to it, then away. She didn't reach for it. She didn't deny it existed. She simply denied the woman who wrote it. You're twisting things, sweetheart, she said. Nobody took anything from you. You left. I served my country, I answered. And while I was gone, you emptied the house. She sighed, the performative kind you use when you think someone is being unreasonable. It wasn't personal. We just did what needed to be done. You keep saying that, I said. Like it absolves you. For a heartbeat, the kitchen held its breath. Even the refrigerator hum quieted, like the house itself was listening. That's where it all started. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. My silence did the work she avoided. Valora straightened her back. Your grandmother wasn't thinking clearly. She was confused. She told me different things on different days. I had her evaluated, I said quietly. Her doctor confirmed she was fully competent. I checked. Her fingers twitched, a tell I had learned to recognize by 12. And still she pushed. She wasn't herself. No, I said. You weren't. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. Her chair scraped across the tile as she sat down, crossing her legs with false calm. You're making this harder on yourself, she said. The house is gone. You need to accept that. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I reached for my phone, tapping into the VA portal. I needed to pull every archived document tied to the loan. Every receipt. Every inspection. Every proof of my ownership. Access denied. I tried again. Same message. Password reset. Blocked. Verification email. Changed. Security contact. Updated to Lazaro Thane. A slow wave of cold rolled up my spine. Not fear, not panic. Recognition. The kind you feel when you realize someone has planned this longer than you assumed. I called the VA helpline. The automated voice transferred me 3 times before a tired agent answered. Ma'am, your account was flagged due to unusual access requests. Someone reported a security concern and updated your information under power of attorney. My father hasn't had POA in years. Well, someone submitted a renewal last spring. Of course they had. Looking back now, I should have seen how far they were willing to go. Valora watched me from across the counter. Everything okay, sweetheart?
You knew, I said.
You knew my accounts were blocked. She didn't blink. Sometimes we have to make decisions for the people we love. Love doesn't erase someone's name, I whispered. It doesn't forge signatures. It doesn't rewrite wills. You're overreacting, and you're lying. She stood slowly, smoothing her blouse. You weren't supposed to come back, she said. You were supposed to move on, like you always do. The words hung there, heavy and deliberate. They weren't meant to hurt. They were meant to end the conversation. To finalize a chapter one hadn't agreed to close. She waited for me to break. I didn't. I gave her the look I learned during my first deployment, the look you give when you know the next shot fired won't be a warning. I turned without another word, stepping toward the back door. I wasn't angry. I was done asking. I left the house with my jaw tight enough to ache. The night was still, but something inside me had started shifting, like a line had finally been crossed, and even my footsteps felt different walking back toward the motel. I didn't slam the door when I entered the room. I didn't throw anything. I just sat at the edge of the bed, hands on my knees, breathing in the kind of silence that feels like a decision forming. By morning, I knew this wasn't shock anymore. It was direction. That's where it all started. The knock on my motel door came just after sunrise. Light filtered through the cheap curtains, soft and gold, touching the carpet Valora would have called tacky. I opened the door expecting housekeeping. Instead, she stood there. Valora held a loaf of banana bread wrapped in foil, smiling like she'd practiced the expression in the mirror. "Thought you might want breakfast," she said. "You look tired." I stepped aside because I didn't have the energy to argue on the doorstep. She walked in like the room belonged to her, placing the bread on the small table beside my keys. She stared at me for a long moment. "I want to talk before this goes any further." "There's nothing to talk about," I said. "You lied. You forged documents. You stripped my name off my home." Her expression softened, and that was always the most dangerous version of her. "If this becomes legal," she whispered, "your father could be named.
His heart isn't what it used to be."
Stress could make things worse. The words landed like cold metal along my spine. Looking back now, I should have recognized the cruelty in the kindness. Her voice lowered. "Don't be the daughter who destroys what's left of this family." She stepped forward and hugged me, arms tight enough to trap. Her breath warmed my ear when she added, "Some things aren't worth dragging through the courts." I didn't return the hug. My hands stayed at my sides. I felt nothing but the shape of manipulation pressing into my skin. She pulled back with a sigh, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeves. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Then she left, just as quietly as she'd arrived. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. When the door clicked shut, I stared at the banana bread, still steaming slightly, and felt a cold steadiness move through me. If she thought guilt would stop me, she didn't know me at all. I grabbed my jacket and keys. The credit union opened at 9. I was there at 8:55, standing in line with a man depositing checks and a woman counting change in a coin jar. The normalcy of it all only made the truth hit harder. At the counter, I gave the teller my information. "I need to close my joint savings account," I said. She typed for a moment. Then her brow wrinkled. "This balance is 0. "That can't be right," I said. "There should be almost 700 left." The teller shook her head. "It was drained 4 weeks ago. Last withdrawal was made by Valora Thane." She turned her screen slightly. "Memo says Home Renovation Fund." My breath didn't hitch. It collapsed. I opened that account when I was 15. I put birthday money in it. Babysitting cash. My first paycheck. I kept it for emergencies.
4 roots.
For everything my parents said I should learn to build on my own. She didn't just take my money. She cashed in my silence. That's where it all started. I thanked the teller, though I don't remember hearing my own voice. My legs carried me out of the building and back to my car, but my mind stayed inside that account, inside that moment where childhood trust and adult betrayal finally touched. When I got back to the motel, I closed the curtains, turned on the lamp, and laid everything out on the bedspread, every piece of truth they tried to bury. The letter from my grandmother, the blocked account notification, the credit union printout, the forged waiver, the photo of the family shrine without me. One by one, these pieces formed a story, my story, and for the first time since coming home, it felt like I wasn't drowning under theirs. I reached for the folder I'd picked up at the clerk's office 2 days earlier. The title on top read, "Petition for Civil Review, Inheritance Fraud." This wasn't about keeping the house, I whispered into the quiet. This is about proving I was here. Then I dialed the number I'd memorized days ago, the housing attorney listed in my grandmother's will. The line rang twice. "Bellamy Law," a woman answered. "This is Diantha Rail," I said. "I'm ready to proceed." I didn't know what was waiting for me next, but I knew I wasn't walking the same path anymore. I wasn't going to make them pay. I was going to make them confess, on paper. I walked into the county clerk's office the way a person walks into weather they can't avoid, steady, braced, already feeling the sting before the wind hits. The lobby smelled like old paper and lemon disinfectant, a scent I knew too well from years of filing military paperwork. My boots tapped against the tiled floor, each step reminding me I wasn't here as a daughter anymore. I was here as someone they tried to replace. I didn't know what was waiting for me next, but I knew I wasn't backing down. That's where it all started. A clerk with tired eyes led me into a small verification room. A fluorescent bulb hummed overhead. The notary, gray hair pulled back tight, glasses low on her nose, sat behind a metal desk. She looked up when I entered, but didn't smile. When the clerk handed her the waiver document, she studied it the way people study a map they don't trust. Her brow tightened, and she squinted toward me. "This signature," she said slowly, pointing, "this isn't hers." The room seemed to shrink. "Are you sure?" the clerk asked. The notary shook her head. The woman who came in to sign this had red hair and wore sunglasses inside. And she rushed. I remember thinking she didn't want to be seen. My stomach knotted. Not at the lie itself, I already suspected that, but at the ease. The certainty. Valora hadn't just forged a document. She'd found someone to walk into a government building and pretend to be me. Looking back now, I should have realized this was never an act of desperation. This was execution.
Clean. Silent. Practiced.
I leaned forward. "Do you have the recording logs from that day?" The clerk typed something into his system, then nodded toward the screen. Time-stamped. "Matches the date your mother asked you not to come home unless you picked a side." My breath stilled in my chest. Of course it did. Of course it matched. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. After I signed the verification forms, I stepped into the hallway, my pulse loud enough to drown out the distant printers. A woman in a navy blazer waited under the exit sign. She stood with her shoulders straight, heels planted, a leather folder tucked against her ribs. "Diantha?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm Miriam Bellamy, your grandmother's attorney." Something in me loosened, just a fraction, like my grandmother's hand had reached through time and placed itself on my shoulder. She opened the folder and handed me a document encased in a clear protector. My grandmother's will. Not altered. Not amended. Not questioned.
Signed.
Dated. Valid. "She gave this to me a month before she passed," Bellamy said quietly. "Told me to hold on to it in case Valora interfered." The word interfered landed like a stone dropped into a deep lake. Bellamy pulled out her phone. "There's something else," she said, pressing play. A voicemail. Faint static, then my grandmother's voice, soft but certain. "If Valora blocks this again, tell Diantha I left the house to her. She deserves it. She's the only one who understood." The hallway blurred for a moment. Not from tears, they would come later, but from the weight of being seen. Truly seen. Looking back now, I didn't realize how much I needed that single sentence to steady me. When I returned to the motel that afternoon, the day clung to me like dust. I showered, changed, and stretched out on the bed, letting exhaustion pull at my limbs. Sleep came quicker than I expected. For weeks, I'd had the same dream, walking toward my house in dim light, the door shutting as I reached for it, my grandmother turning away from me with a look I didn't understand. But tonight, everything shifted. In the dream, the house was open. Sunlight poured through the rooms. Dust swirled in quiet beams like it was dancing for the first time in years. Every room was empty, but not in a lonely way, in a cleansing way. My grandmother wasn't turning away. She wasn't there at all. Just me, standing in the space that was mine long before anyone tried to rewrite it. When I woke, I wasn't gasping, not sweating, not waiting for the panic to release. I just breathed. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. I sat up, letting the early afternoon rays slip through the blinds, striping the carpeting at my feet. The documents Bellamy gave me lay on the table. Evidence.
Truth.
Legacy. They wanted me to disappear so badly, they forgot I could resurrect, with proof. I gathered everything. The will, the voicemail file, the verification forms, copies of every document they forged or twisted. I placed them inside a new binder, one I bought that morning for this exact purpose. The next time I showed up anywhere with my name attached, it wouldn't be to defend myself. It would be to state the truth. They forged the truth on paper. Now I would lay it bare, in front of everyone. I didn't walk out of that hearing needing justice. I walked out finally free of needing their love. That's what changed. Not the documents. Not the signatures. Not even the way the notary had stared at the paper and said, without hesitation, "That's not her." What changed was me. The truth had never been the problem. It had always been how carefully they'd hidden it behind a curtain of tradition, performance, and pleasantries. But now, the curtain was down, and I wasn't reaching for it anymore. That's where it all started. The hearing room wasn't a courtroom. No judge.
No Gabel.
Just 3 commissioners sitting behind a laminate table, flanked by filing cabinets and a water dispenser that wheezed every few minutes. But it was enough. I stood in the center of the room with a binder in my hand, one I had filled with pieces of my past. Pieces they thought no one would miss. The letter, the notarized will, the transaction logs, the photo of the family shrine without me. Bellamy sat behind me, calm as stone. Her presence was like a spine I hadn't realized I needed. Valora entered 5 minutes late, wearing pearl earrings and a soft pink blazer. Lazaro followed her, slower, his eyes on the floor. Joran slumped into a chair at the back, phone in hand, already pretending boredom. The chairwoman called the meeting to order. Her voice was firm but kind. "Ms. Rail, you have the floor." I stepped forward and opened the binder. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm here to show you what happened." And I did. I presented the letter my grandmother had written. Clear, dated, signed. I placed it alongside the will, verified and certified. I added the notary's statement, affirming the woman who signed the waiver wasn't me. I submitted the POA form reactivated without my knowledge. The email trail, the locked VA accounts, the drained childhood savings. I showed them the numbers, the transfers, the memos labeled Home Renovation Fund. And then I ended with a photo, a shelf in my family's living room. My grandmother's photo still there, but the one of her and me gone, replaced with a smiling image of Valora, Lazaro, and Joran, standing in front of my house. "I'm not looking for sympathy," I said. "Just acknowledgement." My name was removed from every space I used to belong. On paper. In memories. In people's mouths. Valora shifted in her seat. Lazaro didn't move. One of the commissioners looked at Valora. "Do the Thanes contest any of this?" Valora's tone was sweet, like syrup dripped too slowly. "We did what was best for the family." She was always away. She never truly settled. We thought it was the right thing. My voice didn't rise, but my spine did. "Say it out loud," I said. She blinked. "Excuse me? Say you lied." The room tightened. Even the air felt heavier. Valora's expression hardened. I did what I had to do. Not an apology. Just a confession dressed up as duty. I looked at Lazaro, hoping for something, anything, but his eyes never met mine. The commissioner closed the folder gently. "This hearing will proceed to formal investigation. If the documents presented are verified and misconduct is found, we will recommend full reversal of the property transfer and impose civil penalties as needed. It was done, not finished, but no longer hidden. Valora finally looked at me, not with guilt, with resentment. The way someone looks when you take back something they never thought you'd miss. That look, she wasn't sorry. She was just shocked she didn't win. I turned toward the exit. My father's voice stopped me. "You didn't have to do this," he said low, almost pleading. I paused at the door. "No," I said, without turning. "But you made sure I would." I stepped into the hallway. The sun outside was too bright for what had just happened. But it didn't feel jarring. It felt earned. Looking back now, I should have said more. But sometimes silence is the only thing louder than a scream. The truth was on paper now. And paper, unlike memory, doesn't lie. I stepped into the hallway with the same binder pressed against my chest, but the weight of it felt different now, lighter, somehow, like the truth inside had finally been allowed to breathe. When I stepped outside, the sunlight hit me straight across the face, and for the first time since landing in Spokane Valley, I didn't flinch. Looking back now, I should have known that this was the real turning point. Not the hearing, not the signatures, not even the notary's confession, but the moment I realized I no longer needed them to validate what I already knew. That's where it all started. 2 months passed quietly, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm tears through and leaves everything oddly still. I found a modest apartment outside town, near the lake where ducks glide across the surface like they're reading the wind. The place wasn't big, and it didn't need to be. It had windows that opened easily, a small balcony, and a soft hum from the baseboard heater that reminded me of late nights in barracks overseas. I carried a single box into the living room, the one I had labeled non-essentials. Funny how the box ended up holding the only things that still felt like mine. My grandmother's framed photo, the old salt lamp, the letter she wrote me, the one Valora tried to bury in cedar and dust. I set the lamp on the side table and plugged it in. Its warm glow spread across the room, soft and steady. It wasn't about the house, I murmured. It was about not vanishing. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. A week later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Tan, official-looking, stamped with a small embossed emblem from the Housing Commission. I carried it inside before opening it, almost afraid of what it might undo. Inside was a concise letter. The sale has been reversed. The deed is restored to your name. Formal investigation of Valora and Lazaro Thane is ongoing. No apology.
No explanation.
Just acknowledgement. That was enough. I sat down at the kitchen counter and read it again. My fingers didn't tremble. I didn't cry. Justice didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet.
Clean.
Like a room finally aired out after years of stale breath. Joran moved out shortly after the decision. The buyer who thought she'd purchased my villa was reimbursed by the county. The yoga room was emptied. The house sat untouched now, still standing but hollow. I didn't go back. Not even for closure. Some doors aren't meant to be reopened. Some rooms remember too much. That's where it all started. One afternoon, Agnes knocked on my door. She held a tin of cookies and the same gentle patience she'd always shown my grandmother. We sat on the balcony watching ducks drift across the water like little boats pushed by invisible hands. "You didn't win," she said after a while. "You just stopped losing." I nodded. "That's enough." We drank tea without speaking. Grief and healing share the same silence sometimes. There was nothing to explain, nothing to justify. Agnes reached over and patted my knee gently, the way my grandmother used to do when words felt too heavy. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I opened my notebook. Not the binder of evidence. This one was new, clean, the pages thick and faintly cream-colored. I turned to the first blank page and let the pen settle in my grip. "I'm not angry anymore," I wrote. "I'm awake." The words poured out easily, like they'd been waiting. I know what I'll pass on, and more importantly, what I won't. I wasn't writing to keep records or plead a case. I wasn't writing for a court or a committee, or even to justify myself to the woman who tried to erase my name. I was writing to rebuild the parts of me they couldn't reach. Looking back now, I should have done this sooner. But healing has its own timing. It doesn't come when you demand it. It comes when you stop trying to earn it. I didn't reclaim the house. I reclaimed my voice. I closed the notebook and set it beside the salt lamp. The room glowed the way my grandmother's did when she prayed quietly before bed.
Warm.
Safe.
Mine.
I stood by the window, watching the ripples move across the lake. My reflection stared back at me, not the daughter who was cast aside, not the soldier who came back to a house she no longer recognized, but the woman who walked out of a hearing room no longer needing to be chosen. I wasn't erased. They tried. But I wrote myself back in. I didn't need the house to prove I belonged. I just needed them to know I remembered everything. Some stories aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some are meant to end, so something honest can begin. In the end, it wasn't really about the villa or the paperwork or even the investigation. It was about remembering that silence is not the same as disappearance, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step back into the story people tried to write you out of. So let me ask you this. Have you ever realized your family was rewriting the truth while you were away living your life? Because if you have, you already know how much it hurts and how much strength it takes to reclaim your name. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of something you've lived through, share it in the comments. Someone out there might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories coming, and I'd be honored to have you here for the next one.